Still, we're building up to my new myth, whether you can tell it or not. I assume you can all recall that it's been pointed out from these tapings that no one can tell me what they're going to say next. But beyond that, consider this. No one can define every word they use. No one. And there you go. You and everyone else just talking along. Probably some of you exceeding the verbal speed limit. And you cannot define every word. And don't get too exotic. How many of you can define enough that would satisfy you if you were just reasonably intelligent and demanding of yourself? How many people can actually define the word for, F-O-R, or of? I mean, don't give me an example, that is to yourself. How many people can define every word they use? And the answer is no one. But now consider this. So what? You can't tell me what you're going to say next. Notice I do have the Christian or Jewish or Buddhist charity about me that I don't bring this up several times a year. Of course, life had the charity, being the atheist it is, or at least the agnostic. But life just has a general charitable feeling toward man that life does not make your nervous system bring it up to you, ever. So it shows, as always, life, whatever it's doing, is better than the greatest person. So no matter how charitable I try to be, or you try to be, always remember this. Life is even more charitable. So life never makes you think of it. And of course, I only try to make you think about it a few times a year. But here we are again, is that people cannot say what they're going to say next. If we need a side trip right quick, especially you people that may be getting this on tape at some other time in some other place, the weirdest thing you ever thought in your life, no matter what you think this is, if this is the first time you've seen it, the second or the 14th, or no matter if you've got strange dreams yourself that there's some kind of information or some way that a person could think and it would be really weird, forget flying saucers, forget dead people, forget religion, and forget mess. If you want weirdness, the weirdness is this. You don't know what you're going to say next, and so what? It doesn't stop you. And plus, if you belong, if you're my sort of people, just for a second, you can hear me say this, that you cannot tell me or yourself what you're going to say next. That is as weird as you can get at the 3D level. Not only so what, that's really the second stage of weirdness. The original weirdness is to hear the first time in your life, to hear that and realize that, my God, that's true. I don't know what I'm going to say next. If things were wired in such a way that this had any specific, direct potential effect on ordinary people, that would be worse than any of the plagues that ever hit Europe. Be worse than atomic blast, would be worse than widespread IRS personal audits. There'd be no way to compare the morbific, horrendous intent. If people could hear, I don't know what I'm going to say next, that would probably immobilize everyone. You could forget King Midas. Everyone would be frozen. At least your jaw would be frozen, because if you sit there and you thought, well, I don't know what I'm going to say next, but it doesn't matter. This is a kind of refinement that I'm trying to get you to see. That is pretty broad-stroked. But now take it very specifically. And we'll assume that most people that putting up with this at all, that you are, just in the ordinary sense, are fairly literate, verbal, intellectually sophisticated at the ordinary level. But think just for a second. There is no debate to this. You couldn't begin to define every word you use. Just ordinary words. And you might say, if you were going to really slip, and say, well, yeah, but I know how to use them. I didn't say you didn't know how to use them, but you can't define them. You're using something that you cannot truly define. And now back to what I said, which was not just a cynical remark. It was a scientific observation of a more complex level, and that was, so what? It doesn't affect anything. What you have are people talking. Everyone, that includes all of us. people talking about that which they don't know. That's what it amounts to. I don't care if you're talking to Mr. Goodwrench and he's giving you the latest word on a Buick. It doesn't mean that he does not seem to know what area he is discussing. But if we stopped and said, wait a minute, define a wrench, and maybe he'd give it a shot. Define the word the, and probably begin to push a mechanic. And probably begin to push some of you. Don't say, well, it's an article. Yeah, but if you had to define what does the, what does that sound stimulate when somebody says the? You never notice the word the, it just goes on. Nowadays, the is almost as common as you know. Which I guess you know is now an article. But at any rate, I'm not sure that you could actually define the word the. And it should be able to strike your nervous system, your brain somewhere, the fact that everyone knows, we'll assume, what the word the means. But then think, well, how can we know what the word means when in a sense I don't know what it means? That is, I cannot define the word the. Or in almost any reasonably complex sentence, some prepositions, for, of, on are going to show up. On you might be able to come up with. How about for? Now, I didn't look these up before I got here, so I can challenge me. How many people could actually define the word for? Get anywhere close to the dictionary, and it has some definition that if you read it, I'm sure we'd all read it and go, well, yeah. That's succinct, beautiful. You know, assuming that you weren't using a Sears and Roebuck dictionary. But a real dictionary would be right on. As soon as you read it, you'd go, yeah, that's it. But right now, could you define the word for? Chances are no. So a man can be talking, my mechanic, and he can be talking about his area, and he may be describing something, and he may be using exemplary language regarding some specific something out there about how he's going to repair a car or what your problem may be. But forget that for a minute. The actual use of words, every word he's using, he does not know the definition of the word. If you stopped him and said, what does for mean? And you could get him not to give an example. He would have to say, I don't know. And yet he uses it, sentence after sentence. You hear it. He used the word the, and he may not be able to define it. But if I ask you, and you couldn't define it, but yet you hear it. It does not matter. The job gets done. Not just your car repaired. The job gets done. So here you have the world full of people, as you may have noticed. All the way from those that are still barely literate to those who are literate to the point that they're almost contributing to oral garbage, I guess. People with motor mouths. So you have now talk everywhere that it's almost impossible, even for the people in the most primitive of societies nowadays, to get along without talk. So we have people talking all the way from the most rudimentary level, vis-a-vis humans, to the most sophisticated level, not just mechanics, but people in the aerospace industry and physics. And it's not just their particular area that may have exotic terminology. You could take a physicist, surely you hear this, and chances are he could not define for. The job gets done. Not the job of fixing cars, sending up spacecraft. The job gets done. So you have people talking, and they don't know what they're going to say next. No one knows what they're going to say next. And a little more specific, if you get past that, which of course you got to get past that, that's why you don't think about it. Then whatever it is you're saying, you don't even know what it is you're saying. We're not talking about now that you cannot even predict just a split second before. So we just ignore that as you're supposed to for the time being. And here you are talking, or here you are listening. You and the person that you're listening to or that you're speaking to, neither one of you can define, you're nowhere close. You can't define every word that you use. And yet the job gets done. Now you remember the division I made of words having, and language having, just one I made up for a particular purpose, but it's still full of vim in the area where I am now tonight. that you can look at words as having a leading level and a sub-level. At the leading level, you're back to the fact part of the way the job gets done, or part of the response that should be in your own brain for me saying, so what, is that at the leading level, the leading edge of language, energy, the stimulation is being conveyed. Now, any considerations as to the specific content of what's being said is going to, relatively speaking, fall into the subcarrier level. That is, it may not be, if you try to examine it from this way just for the time being, it may not really be of any pertinence what people are saying, which is what I was trying to suggest last time we were taping. And if you begin to get any grasp of that, it's irrational. Old intelligence can't really deal with it. You can hear what I'm saying, but it's just insane. But if you begin to get a glimpse of it, then you would further get a glimpse of it truly does not matter whether people know the definition of the words they're using, since the words, that is the definitions, are the sub-level. That's the subcarrier information. The leading level, the leading edge of what language is energy, is stimulation. But it does seem, by all ordinary views, it does seem that you cannot be stimulated unless somebody's speaking your language, that we're not animals, and grunts and moans won't get it, that you've got to be speaking the language, you've got to know what the other person's saying. That's the way they can be stimulated, right? Right? I mean, if you call somebody a dirty SOB, and you say it in Spanish, and the person only speaks Italian, then how are they going to be rightfully stimulated to be angry or frightened? And you can say, well, they can't be. So therefore, the definitions, actually the content of what's being said, is of supreme importance, right? Sure. Then what I just get through saying? I say it wasn't. Yeah, but that can't be. Because if the person didn't understand that you were calling them a dirty SOB, then they can't get mad. Right? It's just obvious. Well, except for this. Except for this. What if you do say it in Italian, and they speak Italian, and they don't know the definition. They really don't. Of bastard. Or of. Since I use son of a bitch. They might know bitch. They might know the real denotation of it. It's not the connotation. But how about of? Son of a bitch. Could they define of? I suggest you very likely they could not. But that's no great interference with it, is it? I mean, still, if one guy calls another one in his native language, that the subcarrier, that is the definition of the words, the content of the words, you dirty son of a bitch. And the guy hears it. And he properly gets mad or he gets frightened. And then I stop and I say, wait. Can you define every word that you just accepted as being an insult? If he can't define of, how can he be insulted? How can he take the energy of whatever kind it was? If he cannot define, if he doesn't know every word in the sentence. Well, surely that's a minor problem. Well, it is for ordinary intelligence. Because ordinary intelligence does not have to sharpen its skates. Are we back on? We are. Modern technology, people. Well, wait a minute, though. Don't anyone take that as being an insult or a slight at modern technology, because chances are the camera and this equipment will last longer than your brain. And if it doesn't, at least this stuff is warranted. It can be repaired. And by the looks of some of you people, I don't know. My advice, you didn't ask me, no offense, but my advice is try your best, even if you still believe you're under warranty, but I'd do my best not to have any sort of breakdown and actually have to challenge the repair department. If you know what I mean. It's best if you can just go along and not ever have to take this into the shop. As we say in Finland, a word to the Finns. It does not matter, roughly where I was, if you begin to see whether the person can actually define all the words. But I know some of you were drawing a blank when I was doing that little act. You know, I tried to get you to see that from a more complex view, what I was calling the leading edge, that is the heart of human communication, is simply energy. That's what we was trying to do last time we were taping, which may seem to be obvious, but it's not obvious because you can't remember it. You can't see past it. Ordinary intelligence is fired. It's like it's fired by a certain degree of verbal energy. And let's say that to make it up, that it's fired and it requires 90-octane stimuli, verbal stimuli coming from somewhere else, or even written stimuli. We're talking about that which seems to be inherent in words, that you can read a word. Somebody can send you a note that say, hey, I know who you are and I think you're a dirty SOB. That, all the little drawings on the paper, the little ink, stimulates your brain, goes into your limbic system, and you get mad. It would seem, even though I say that that is the primary purpose, is to stimulate. And then I tried to get you to separate it and to say that the words, the content, is not really of any importance. And if I talk along a few minutes, I can get many of you, there's no offense to you, you'd be doing the proper thing, I can drag many of you's attention to such a degree that you go, well, yeah, that the content's not really important. In other words, I can make up a quick example, I guess, I always have to, that instead of calling it a dirty SOB, how about you call him a dirty MF or a dirty zither brain? And he gets just as mad. And then I say, all right, you see, the words didn't matter. You intended to insult him. And so you call him a dirty SOB and you think, all right, those words, that's the ones that set him on fire. Yeah, but all right, instead of this time, let's call him a dirty zither brain. And this time he gets just as mad. Then I can say, well, was it the words? Then if you're ordinary, I guess you'd walk off and say, well, let me think a minute. We don't have a minute, okay? What you got to consider is this, that by all appearances, once you even take into any reasonable account what I'm saying, that words are to stimulate. They're forms of energy. It's just no doubt about it. And you go, okay. Then you'd have to immediately think that the second thing I was going to say, if I didn't really press it on you, that the second thing has got to be flawed if I say the content of what's said is not important. Because you think, well, it is important. And it's not. But it's unreasonable to say that. But then I start putting out examples of whether you call somebody a dirty SOB or a dirty zither brain. Then your own brain would try to find some way out of that. And surely it could, or if I wanted to take another second, I could find some way out. And they say, nah, it still is the content of the words. And it's not. All right, let's say that it has to be. Well, I just can't deal with that. It's got to be, because it matters what you say. Such as the example I made up. If you called a guy a dirty SOB, and on top of that, a zither brain, and you did it in Spanish and he only speaks Italian, it wouldn't work. He wouldn't be insulted because the sound would not stimulate his brain, because what you said in Spanish, he doesn't know what it means. So there you are, right? Okay, now back to where I started tonight. All of that sounds all right, except for this. No matter what language it is, no matter what the words are, nobody can define every word they're using. So to varying degrees, no one knows what they're talking about. So how does everything get done? The job gets done, everybody gets properly excited, everybody gets properly frightened, everyone gets properly offended and insulted, and yet you try your best and get right to the point and just call a guy a dirty SOB. And I say, what does of mean? Define of. And you can't. But then if you were really going to push it, you'd say, well, it doesn't matter. And then you'd be getting dangerously close to my area. And I'd say, really? You say, well, that one word doesn't matter. I was mad and I said, you dirty SOB. And he knew what I meant. And I said, wait a minute. Let me ask him. I say, sir, do you know what of means? And he says, no. And I said, well, I was trying to show these people a strange thing that people talk and don't know what they're saying. And he'd probably say, hey, you're nuts. I don't have to know what the word of means. I know what you dirty SOB meant, and I know what that guy intended. Just because I don't know what the word of means, I can't define it. They're getting dangerously close, though, you hear? Because he would say, well, it doesn't matter. He's saying it doesn't matter that I don't know the definition of everything that's being said to me. What he's saying is I cannot define, I cannot identify all of the energy flowing into me. Some of it seems to be AC, some of it seems to be DC or whatever, and some of it, now that you point out, I don't know what it is, but it still excites me. Do you hear they're getting close to the impossible? That I almost want to say, well, wait a minute. I told these people before I talked to you two guys, I was trying to tell some people that the leading edge, the prime carrier of the information, which is a form of energy, inherent in human conversation, is in the energy itself, not what's said. And they'd go, no, you almost tricked me, but nah, it does matter. It does matter, because if that guy, I'm speaking for this guy over here now, if he said, now if he'd call me a dirty bus driver, I wouldn't care. And I know what the word bus driver means, but he called me a dirty SOB. Now you're saying I don't know what the word of means in SOB. And you're right, I can't define it. But I know that I've been insulted, and I am insulted, and I'm mad. And so just because I don't know the one word in there, it doesn't matter. So you got me, right? Except for this. They're skating so close to the fact of what I just said. Except he has to localize it. He has to say, well, that one word doesn't matter. But if you're continually talking, and if I could step in and start picking out every sentence you say, and so what does so-and-so mean? Define that word, and you go, well, I don't know. So we have to put of, and then the you probably can't define. And it gets into all sorts of things that you can't really define, other than you can give an example. But you can't actually define the word. And so then, in every sentence, let us say, more or less, we start finding those words. You understand it's close that these people's response to me is saying, well, wait a minute, one word doesn't matter. A guy called me a dirty SOB. Of course, I could get probably dirty and say, well, define dirty. I guess he might give it a shot. Well, something that's not clean. Of course, there's a danger in this. There's a trap in all this if you don't know. Not for me to try and show off, but some of you already hear it, because even if they came up with a reasonable, if you say, well, it means not clean. Then he's got to know something, if he's going to be a little more specific. Well, why is that part of the insult? Why are you offended? And he could say, well, wait a minute, it's the whole sentence about you dirty SOB. And I say, wait a minute. Let's take one word at a time. The whole thing is some ways tied together or life's insane. Why is not clean an insult? Let's say he comes up with something then. But there was a side path that I think some of you are laughing, even if you don't know why. Because if you don't know what you're going to say next, you don't know why you laugh next. So I'll go ahead and tell you. If somebody apparently comes up with a reasonable definition, if I say dirty, and they say, well, it means not clean. And I say, okay, what does not mean? The obvious one would be, what does clean mean? And if you go with that, but I could say, well, what does not mean? How many people could actually define not? Let's say you try to give it some kind of shot, like, well, not is non-existent. Well, no, wait a minute, it couldn't be that. Or else he couldn't be insulting you if he's calling you something that's non-existent. This is not a verbal game, because there's nowhere else really to go with it. This is not cynicism for you people on tape. It is not irony. This is the nature of life, and it's the part that flies right through your brain. It's you looking at a movie, and there's another movie going on. You think the movie is in 2 dimensions, it's in 3 dimensions. If you ever get a glimpse it's in 3 dimensions, it's in 4 dimensions. If you ever think, well, I'm hearing better now, they've got some Dolby sound, I can hear 2 speakers here in the theater, there are 3 speakers. And if you hear 3, there's true surround sound that's going on back here. And you do not know. No one knows all that's going on. You don't even know what's going on at the level of things you say, absolute dogmatic, unconditional statements that you would bet your life on, and you cannot define everything you're saying. But does anybody notice? No. And does it matter? Apparently not. The job gets done. It is, and this is not a sarcastic wrap-up, I've already said it, but consider how easy, how appropriate it is that people are wired and primed up to refer to one another, collectively, individually, that people here and there, somebody specifically, does not know what they're talking about. Or somebody, I guess, could have heard some of this tonight, a reasonable person, just an ordinary person, and if I said people don't know what they're talking about, then they could say, well, hey, the way you put it, you're correct. Nobody knows what they're talking about. Okay, but so what? It doesn't matter, because the truth is, even if we define, by my definition now, that no one can define everything they're saying, so therefore we define or we describe all that's being said, by and large. And if you're good, strike by and large. Everything that's being said is being said by people who do not know what they're talking about. And yet they're talking about something that is ultimately meaningful, that is not required that they know what they're talking about. And so the ordinary views that life makes people whole, that is, and it serves a purpose, of course, because that's part of the whole scenario. But if somebody's saying, these people over here, that guy does not know what he's talking about, it's not true. I mean, it's true he doesn't know what he's talking about, but it's also not true that the guy accusing him knows he doesn't know what he's talking about, because the guy accusing him doesn't know what he's talking about. All right? So, but it doesn't matter. If you get more complex to say that he doesn't know what he's talking about, now we're back to one of the problems. What if the guy is trying to describe how to fix an automobile and he's using descriptions about air conditioning repair, and that you know better? So you could say, he does not know what he's talking about. I mean, the guy's a sham. He's trying to show off here and talk about how he can work on cars, and he's talking about stuff about compressors, and he does not know anything about automobiles. He does not know what he's talking about. That's not true. But now I understand at the level of the subcarrier, that which seems to be important to ordinary people, that is the context of what the man's saying. He's describing how to fix an automobile, and he obviously knows nothing about it. Right? We got that? Okay. So we say, or somebody says, he does not know what he's talking about. That is the context of what he says. The content of what he says is fallacious. That here is a prime example of someone who does not know what they're talking about. Okay. But so what? Something meaningful is being done. For one thing, it's got this guy accusing him. Well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. It could be doing all kinds of things. I can start unraveling a scenario here just as fast as I can talk. He is indeed, let us say, from some view, trying to show off. He met this girl over here and she started talking about cars. And then he started talking about all the cars he has and how much he knows about cars. And then somebody else standing over here says, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just showing off. He does not know what he's talking about. That's not the point. It is energy flowing. He's got this girl over here excited. She may think, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about anyway, but if you're going to this trouble to impress me, and then she punches somebody, they begin to laugh. Somebody over here believes it's true. Another guy says, wait a minute, my car does that. You mean it's a bad compressor? I should... If we were talking about staying here at a cocktail party, let us say, in this little... And one guy, we're isolating reality, which is artificial, arbitrary, and always flawed. But since we're talking... This one guy has been identified by one other guy as saying he doesn't know what he's talking about. So what? That's not the point. Him not knowing what he's talking about in the content does not change the fact that he is spreading energy. He's got one guy saying he doesn't know what he's talking about. Then he's got the person he's trying to impress, either impressed or not impressed, and punching somebody else. And he's got somebody else believing what he did. Then the guy says he doesn't know what he's talking about. It spreads. The guy staying over here said, that's my brother, by the way, and I don't appreciate you talking that way. Who the hell are you? Who are you, Mario Andretti? How do you know so much about cars? And so this is going. And then maybe the host, the person whose house it is, comes over and says, hey, look, don't start a fight here. What the hell is going on? All of this on the basis, to just jump in the middle, all on the basis of one guy not knowing what he's talking about, right? Ho, ho, ho. Don't tell me he didn't know what he's talking about. If the purpose of talk is what I told you, is specifically to move energy. No less than that. That's what words are. Then to say that somebody doesn't know what they're talking about is to say what? Well, you got to get past the 4D level, but the point is, so what? It's not that zero is meaningless, to say it's nothing because something is happening, but the point is so what? In a truly scientific sense. That is, that all that anybody can say about a 3D occurrence, all that anybody can say happened, all that anybody can say did not happen, those who say, well, it partially happened, or those who say it happened and it shouldn't have happened, anything that can be said. This is a variation, you recall, of another law of five-dimensional physics that I gave you once, that life is big enough for everybody. This is simply a variation of that, is so what? That is, no matter what happens, so what? That is, you don't know what you're going to say next, and yet you say something, and you live out your years, may become popular, famous, rich. And so, just the fact that you don't know what you're going to say next, so what? Did it hurt you? Nope. Didn't bother me at all. You may make your living talking. And I say, if you'll notice, you cannot define, you can't begin to define every word you use. And somebody goes, you're right. So what? Is it hurt you? Nope. Just never thought about it, but you're right. I don't know what I'm saying. You hear, this is not a shrug, this is not irony or sarcasm, this is a scientific rule. So what? The job gets done. Going to try to skate fast. Recently, to make this sound timely, recently it was on television. This guy dies. The funeral home begins to take care of him and sends word back to his family, do you know that Mr. So-and-so is a woman? Well, some of you may have seen this happens periodically, but this one made the news because the guy was a minor celebrity up in the Pacific Northwest. And he's a woman. All right, the point I was getting to is they interview, he's been married to this woman, his wife, his ex-wife, or his wife, the deceased wife. They adopted children, but they had been married, it was something like 25 years. And so there it is, and they're interviewing her, and her comment, her wrap-up was this. You know, this, you know, well, they asked her, did you ever know? And she said no, and her wrap-up statement that I want to point to is, she says, he was the ideal husband. This woman is serious. Sane, she says, he was every woman's dream, but he was the ideal husband. Now, of course, you can all have a little laugh if you got to. Just think about that. She was married unknowingly. She said she didn't know. All of his, he had 3 or 4 adopted children, grown. They said they had no idea. She says that this woman that she thought was a man, she looks right at the camera, that is looking at herself, and says he was the ideal husband. Listen quick. If we were dealing with a more manifold, complex level of non-spatial intelligence, is it possible that the ideal state of anything might be in what it is not? In other words, she says that Billy, I think was his name, she said was the ideal husband. All right, the man was a woman. Therefore, even by the crudest definition, we don't have to go check a dictionary. We all know this in the English language. A woman cannot be a husband. Forget the sexual revolution. That just denies the word. So, for her to say, Billy was the ideal husband, is it possible, at some other level, from some other view, that a thing might be in its ideal state when it's in the state of what it is not? Him? Anything else that you can plug into it? Now, at least you think that was too exotic. I fear that not enough of you followed this, and we don't have time for me to stay on it forever, is forget something that seems to be that much of an extraordinary occurrence. How about everything in life that people say? In other words, she says that my departed, let's say that she's standing there next to his body and pointing the TV camera, she says, and they've already talked about the fact he's a woman, and she didn't know, the family didn't know, so they've done all that. And her closing, they wrap up a little bit. She says, he was the ideal husband. All right, she is saying that he was not what he is. And yet she's simultaneously saying, while not being what he was the ideal of what he was not. In other words, he was the ideal husband when he wasn't a husband. It's impossible. He was a woman, so he could not have been a husband. There's no way to discuss it. So she's describing that this thing, in this case a person, that this thing was in its ideal state when it was in the state of what it was not. In other words, that Billy was the ideal husband while he was a woman. Consider now everything that you could point out, that all intelligence points at something and says, well, that's obviously the best of its breed. Or this is obviously, just fill in the blank. Do I have to do the obvious for you? That this truly is a delight for the eyes. Now let's take the woman at face value. She says that she did not know, had no idea, just accepted that Billy was a woman. As far as she was concerned, he was the ideal husband. Now, what are you going to say? She lived with him. She was there. You cannot sit there, if we're just taking all this at the face value, which is good enough for all of this kind of discussion, for you to go, oh, forget that. She lived with him 25 years, didn't know he was a woman, but on top of all of that, he was the ideal husband. So she's saying that a husband is in the ideal state when he's not a husband. That is, when he's not a man. When it's impossible, the thing cannot be what it seems to be, and therefore, in some way, it could be in its ideal state. So now what if you fill in any other word, that this is surely such and such, that's as obvious to you as it would be that she's saying that it was obvious that he was my husband. I mean, it turns out that it's impossible because he was a woman. And yet he was the ideal thing. Him not being what he was made him ideal. So now anything that you find to be positive or negative that you say, this is obviously a blight on the face of mankind. What if what you say seems as obvious as this guy dressed up like a man with a wife, with adopted children, and everybody took him as a man? That it's what you're saying, that this is a blight, this is insanity, or this is beautiful, this is true. That what you're saying is just as obvious as it was up until the funeral director found out, that it was just as obvious that Billy was a husband. In fact, an ideal husband by his own wife. So what if what you're anointing with your words as being quite proper, beautiful, ugly, smelly, that it's just as obvious that Billy was a husband, an ideal husband, as it turns out. And you say this is just as obvious. Can any of you do that kind of internal, you got to find a little new spot though, that kind of intellectual gymnastics without me trying to do it for you? That Billy was a person. He was dressed like a man. He lived a life as a man. His children called him father. His wife called him honey, husband. That up until the point that they found out that he was not in the state that he said he was, that is, Billy the husband was not a husband. It's impossible. Up until that point, it was obvious. There was no question as to what he was. He was so-and-so's husband. He was these guys and daughters, their father, their adopted father. That's what he was. No question about it up until a certain point. And you may say, and you may have other people, the same way his community and family agreed about him, the husband, that let us say that you identify something as being absolutely blank, totally uncalled for, unworthy, ugly, beautiful, whatever it is. And let us say that many people around you agree that that is the common concurrence of opinion. But now consider, and what if you say, I find this to be the ideal, the epitome of beauty, of truth, and people around you go, yes, yes. That this is the ideal state. We can discuss what would be for a manifestation in human life of justice and beauty and etc. I suggest to you that here it is. Here is the ideal, and people around you agree. Yes, it is. Now remember Billy, the guy that was a woman. He was the ideal husband, except that's impossible. I mean, it's not opinion. It's not me saying that it's my opinion it's impossible. By definition, this woman, going by the name of Billy, could not be an ideal husband. She couldn't be a husband. And yet, now, at this particular point in space and time, now that he's laying there stiff, his wife and other people join in, but she points out specifically that he was the ideal husband. She is saying that he was fulfilling an ideal condition by not being what he appeared to be, what he was assumed to be. So what if you identified that this is obviously the living epitome of truth, of beauty, of shoddy workmanship, whatever it is, and it seems to be, except what if it's not? And it's not just the opposite. It's not that just a man and a woman's two opposite things. Forget that. Billy was called the ideal husband, and he was no such thing. Not just the opposite, he was just not that. And yet by the person closest to him, he was identified. She was saying that the ideal husband is no husband, or the ideal husband is somebody that literally cannot be a husband, that's the ideal. What if the ideal beauty, what if the ideal state of beauty is that which cannot be beautiful? What if the ideal state of that which is untrue is something that cannot be untrue? That the ideal state of anything might be the very state in which it cannot exist. I know, as I'm given to say at times, my suggestion, if you get a glimpse of that, that sure would explain a lot. That'd explain more than one of those $119 encyclopedia sets from Kroger. Let me give you another. Maybe this will help a little. The one that I had Cairo do, in fact it popped up tonight, that there could be no, without the illusion of freedom, there could be no captivity. I could go on and probably get some of you to see some peripheral things that I certainly don't have time for on tonight's tape. But that is no more play on words than what I've just got through for the last 20 minutes, believe it or not. If there were not, we're just talking about the human level, of course, if there were not the illusion, the perception, if illusion bothers you too much, since of course there is no such thing as illusion, but the illusion / perception of freedom, were it not for that, there could be no captivity. Men would not, if it were not apparent that you could say anything you want to, then you would not be saying all those things that you don't know what you're going to say next, and you don't know what it means what you say. In other words, it's be very close, and if you can get a glimpse of, you might have to think, well, somebody does have their hand up my knickers, and I'm simply playing, I'm a Muppet, and I don't know it. And of course, for years, I sometimes look in the mirror, and especially maybe if I'm going to have to make a speech down at the conference or something, maybe people stand in front of the mirror and check themselves out, or they record their voice, and yes, I think about my speaking demeanor, and et cetera, et cetera. But you might get a glimpse of the fact of, hey, I might as well be riding up on top of Jim Henson's hand, because I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. I don't know what I'm going to say. I don't know when I'm going to say it. Plus, when I do talk, now that you pointed out, I don't know half the words. I can't define them. Oh, I know that I've got them used in a sentence, and people nod, and so I know it makes sense to me, but once you ask, do I know what the words mean? No. So then you'd be faced real quick. Some of you might get just a glimpse, which won't hurt you real bad. It's like being brushed by a huge locomotive going by about 200 miles an hour. But I mean, it just kind of touches your sleeve. So you get just a glimpse that, wait a minute, I'm just being driven to talk. I might as well be a speaker and a tuner and a receiver. Just this stuff's coming out of me, and I've got no control over it. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know what I'm saying. I don't even know what it means. I can't even define it, and yet I do it, and I see everybody else does it. All right, if that's true, just for a second, if that's true, do you understand? You would have to believe otherwise, or you couldn't go on with it. Now, do you see, without the illusion of freedom, there'd be no captivity. Unless you thought, you and everybody else, that you did have, once you get to the point that you can think, which is the same time that you can talk, that if you did not think, well, I can say anything I want to. I can withhold my comments until I hear more of what they're saying. I can start to say something and then decide no. I can start to say something and think, no, I better not use that term, not in this company. I got the freedom to do this. I can choose to talk or not to talk. I can choose to agree, or maybe I won't agree with these people, or I won't disagree, but some of these guys, I might do business with them later, so It doesn't matter. If there were not that feeling that I have this kind of freedom, who would put up with the captivity? Not that you'd have any choice, but based upon the standards of apparent behavior and thinking and feeling in humanity now, if everyone was suddenly made aware of the fact that I am no more than a speaker, probably one of these 29-cent ones that they used to sell at Radio Shack or Lafayette before they went into the big 11, that I am simply a little speaker and this just comes out. If you didn't think otherwise, you'd quit doing it. All this is not true because none of this would happen. But that's the way it would seem to be predictable if everything stayed as it was and suddenly everybody realized, wait a minute, I've got absolutely no freedom over what I say. None. I'm just a mouthpiece for something. All right, that would be, if you realize your captivity, then what would happen? If everything was still as it is now, I'd suggest to you that most people, after perhaps some people having a fit of being kind of PO'd about it, but after that, there'd be the great inclination to just everybody shuts up. So, there can be no captivity without initially the illusion of some kind of freedom in whatever area. This is true about everything, but specifically true tonight, I'm trying to hint to you, in human speech. I had not changed the subject, however. I use that as an example. Do you see then that the ideal state of something may be that state of what a thing is not? That is, let's just say, just for an example, that no one has the least bit of freedom as to what they're going to say. What they're going to say, how they're going to say it, when they're going to say it, but no one has any freedom. But does anybody believe that? Absolutely not. Everybody says just the opposite. They would say, well, speech, if it's going to mean anything, there's got to be freedom of speech. Not just politically, but there's got to be freedom of speech that we can discuss important matters. We're scientists. If we're in the artistic community, we've got to discuss different schools and the changing face of the art world and its relationship to society and etc. That there has to be freedom. That the ideal state of human communication is where it's free. That we can say whatever we want to, politically, artistically, anyway. There it is. Everybody would agree to that. Okay. Now, what if the ideal state of something is the state that it is not? Such as Billy was the ideal husband, except he wasn't a man. Now, where he wasn't a husband, and yet he was the ideal husband. So what if the epitome, what if the greatest example, the greatest state, ordinary intelligence says, of talk is freedom? That the ideal condition, the state of human speech, is freedom of speech. And everybody agrees. Do you not see? While identifying the state that it's not as being what it is, it's ideal. That is, we identify captivity as what? Freedom! There you are. Billy was the ideal husband. And the only way he was the ideal husband was that he was not a husband. The only way that captivity can exist, and everybody just wallow in it, and everybody just love to be married to this ideal husband. The only way everybody can wallow in captivity is to call it what? Freedom. And this is not some sort of delusion. This is not some sort of intellectual failing on individual humanity's part. It was what I was suggesting. What if? Could it be that what a thing is not might be its ideal state? I say I'm hinting. I've done better than a hint, haven't I? If you're listening. That is not, of course, the end of it. But at this level, at the 3D level, of things being identifiable, which they've got to be, that something can be identified and somebody says, that's so-and-so. And whether people know why they said it, whether everybody involved understands and defines all the words, it is still identified as being something. And people either agree or disagree. Well, let's say it's identified by a large number of people that this is that thing. This here is an ideal husband. Here is truth personified. Here is the most beautiful example of this thing. And what if this ideal state that they're identifying, this ideal condition of a thought, an idea, an artistic feeling, a religious feeling, some form of behavior, like being a husband, that the ideal state that they have identified, that they've described, is in truth the state of what the thing cannot be. That Billy cannot be a husband no matter what's said. And yet he was identified. And many people nodded. She said he was the ideal husband. When that's the very thing that he was not. It's impossible. There could be no captivity without it being called by such a name that would apparently be the ideal state of it. And what would be the ideal state of captivity to most people? Well, all right, if you're going to say that the ideal state of something could be the thing that it's not, then by God, if it were true that we were subject to or threatened with some form of captivity, then, all right, if what you say is true, then I would want that to turn into non-captivity, which would be called, well, all right, freedom. Okay, good. And of course, ordinary intelligence, I guess we go, well, what the hell did we just go through just then? I got them to call the ideal state of something they didn't like what it was not. Oh, well, then, I like that. He was the ideal husband. Well, other than the fact that he wasn't. Not open to opinion. It's impossible. He could not be in the husband state. That is, she could not have been. Can't be. And so by it being impossible that she could have ever been in that condition, in that state, she has now been identified as being the ideal example of that state of which she cannot be. Well, begin to get a glimpse of it. It is slicker than a 65 Chrysler 300. And to be able to see it, I guess, those who can do it are probably almost as scarce as that particular Chrysler product. Well, the faster I talk and the more nights we tape here leading up to my new creation myth, as always, how about this? The further behind we get, except for this. What if the ideal state, you'd think the ideal state is not getting behind. So we keep right in tempo. And I just point out we're getting behind. I had another handful of paragraphs. I was trying to say get up closer. Maybe next time we tape is do the myth. But now it's obviously going to be put off a while. So the ideal state, if that's what we're trying to get to, is for me to get to this new thing that I was hinting that some of you might find to be a wrap-up of the decade of fooling around with this, or as long as you've been here. And I say, well, we're getting behind, so that's not the ideal state. What did I just get through talking about? Wasn't anybody listening? I was listening. I was. It's a good thing, too. Well, I guess we'll have to stop the tape here. And we're about the ideal state next time, which, of course, in many people's opinion, is Missouri.